It's 1947, deep in the Alaskan wilderness, where the cold is just biting it. A killer that sneaks up on you in the dead of night, freezing everything it touches. And there you are, a young woman named Margaret Anderson, all alone in a flimsy canvas tent as the temperature plunges to minus 45 degrees Fahrenheit. The kind of cold that makes your bones ache and your breath turn to ice crystals in the air. And your husband has been gone for days, maybe weeks, leaving you to face a brutal storm that's burying everything under feet of snow. But instead of panicking or giving up, you decide to build your own shelter from scraps of metal left over from the war, using nothing but your hands, some wire, and sheer willpower, because if you don't, you might not make it through the night. Now, hold on, because this isn't some made-up tale from a movie. This is the real story of how one ordinary homesteader turned into a survival legend. And by the time I'm done telling it, you'll wonder what you'd do in her shoes. Back then, after World War II, the U.S. government was pushing people to settle the wild frontiers of Alaska through the homesteading program, where folks like Margaret and her husband, fresh from a farm in Minnesota, could claim free land if they promised to live on it, clear it, and make it productive. Sounding like a dream for adventurous souls tired of city life or post-war struggles. But the reality was harsh, with long, dark winters where the sun barely peeked over the horizon, and isolation that could drive anyone mad if they weren't tough enough. Margaret, in her mid-20s, wasn't some rugged explorer type she grew up helping on the family farm. Milking cows and chopping wood. Sure. But Alaska was a whole different beast, with its dense spruce forests, frozen rivers like the Tanana, and wildlife that could be as dangerous as the weather itself, from moose trampling through camp to bears sniffing around for food, though in winter, it was the cold that was the real enemy. Capable of dropping 2 levels where exposed skin freezes in minutes and machinery grinds to a halt. They arrived in the Tanana Valley, a spot known for its rich soil hidden under the permafrost, and set up a basic camp with that canvas tent, a small wood stove for heat, and supplies like beans, rice, and salted fish to get them through. Planning to build a proper log cabin come spring when the ground thawed, but as fall turned to winter faster than they expected. The first big snow hit in late October, dumping 2 feet overnight and turning their world into a whiteout, with winds howling like ghosts through the trees, ripping at the tent seams and letting in drafts that no amount of blankets could block. Margaret's husband had to leave suddenly to help neighbors whose cabin caught fire, good people looking out for each other in those remote parts. But that left her solo, digging out the tent every morning just to reach the firewood pile, her fingers numb, even in thick gloves, and ice forming on the inside walls from her own breath. Making sleep a miserable battle against hypothermia, where you'd wake up shivering uncontrollably, wondering if dawn would ever come. As the days dragged on without him, and the cold deepened, she knew the tent wouldn't hold much longer. Another storm could collapse it entirely, trapping her inside or worse. So one crisp morning, with the thermometer reading 15 below, she ventured out and spotted something she'd overlooked before. The ruins of an old Quonset hut. Those half-cylinder metal buildings the military used during the war for storage at a nearby abandoned airstrip, now collapsed under years of snow and neglect. But the corrugated steel sheets were still there, tough and rust-resistant, just waiting to be repurposed. It hit her like a spark in the dark. This could be her salvation, a way to build something sturdier. But could she really do it alone, with no tools beyond a shovel, some rope, and wire from the supply kit, in conditions where every movement sapped your energy and mistakes could be fatal? As she started digging out those heavy sheets, her mind racing with doubt and determination, little did she know that the worst was yet to come. A blizzard that would test every inch of her ingenuity and push her to the brink. But what exactly did she build, and how did it save her life? With those steel sheets unearthed from the snow, like buried treasure, Margaret dragged them one by one across the frozen ground to a flat spot near a cluster of spruce trees that could act as a natural windbreak, each sheet about 8 feet long and 4 feet wide, heavy enough to make her muscles burn after just a few trips. But she paced herself, knowing that exhaustion in this cold could lead to careless errors like frostbite or worse, and as she positioned them in a semicircle, overlapping the edges to form walls, she secured them with twisted wire and rope looped through the holes where bolts once held the original structure together, pounding rocks into the frozen earth to anchor the base. Since digging proper holes was impossible with the permafrost like solid rock beneath her shovel, she envisioned a small, rounded hut, maybe 10 feet by 12, not grand, but efficient. Tall enough in the center to stand up without stooping too much, and to make it even warmer, she decided to dig down into the ground, about 2 feet deep inside the footprint, using the excavated dirt to bank up the outside walls for extra insulation. Because she remembered from farm life how burrowing below the frost line could tap into the earth's lingering warmth, even if just a little. turning the shelter into a sort of half-underground den that would hold heat better than anything above ground. The real genius, though, came with the chimneys. She knew a single stove wouldn't cut it in these extremes, where a hot fire for cooking could overheat the space quickly, forcing you to open the door and let in deadly cold, or a low fire might not combat the chill at all. So she planned for 2 separate fire pits, each with its own vent, one for intense heat when needed, and the other for steady, radiant warmth that could burn slow through the night without constant tending. For the first chimney, she gathered flat stones from the nearby creek bed, still accessible under a thin layer of ice, and stacked them carefully through a hole she cut in the roof sheet with a hatchet, binding the gaps with a mix of clay-like mud dug from a softer spot and packed snow that would freeze solid like mortar, creating a sturdy tube that drew smoke up and out without leaking. The second chimney repurposed a length of old metal piping from the Quonset wreckage, wedged into another roof opening and sealed the same way. Simpler, but effective for the smaller fire. Inside, she lined the walls with fresh spruce boughs, their needles creating a fluffy barrier that trapped air, and added a piney scent that masked the metallic tints. Then draped sections of the old tent canvas over that for an additional layer, forming pockets of dead air that acted like natural insulation. And for the floor, she spread more boughs topped with a tarp to keep dampness at bay, while the low entrance a gap at one end covered by a heavy canvas flap. It took her 5 grueling days to finish, working from first light until dusk shortened the hours. Her hands blistered and raw despite gloves, but on that final evening, as the sun dipped low, casting long shadows over the snow, she lit the first fire in the main pit, using dry birch bark as kindling and split spruce logs that burned hot and clean. Watching anxiously as smoke curled up the stone chimney without backdraft, and within an hour, the interior warmed past freezing, enough to melt the frost on her boots and let her shed her heavy coat for the first time in weeks, a small victory that brought tears to her eyes amid the crackling flames. The second fire, started in the smaller pit with slower burning wood, provided that gentle background heat, allowing her to regulate the temperature like a pro, boiling water for tea on one side while warming her toes on the other. And as she settled in that night, feeling secure for the first time since her husband left, the winds picked up outside, whispering warnings of the storm brewing on the horizon. But would her handmade haven hold up when the real fury hit? With temperatures dropping to -45 and snow piling up like a tomb. Just 3 days after Margaret cozied up in her new shelter, the sky darkened like a bad omen, and the blizzard roared in with vengeance. Winds screaming at 50 miles per hour, whipping snow into a blinding frenzy that erased the landscape, and temperatures nosediving to -45 degrees Fahrenheit, where the cold pierced like knives through any crack. But inside her Quonset-inspired hut, buried now under 4 feet of drifts that actually helped insulate like a giant snow blanket, she hunkered down with her stockpiled firewood, rationing it carefully to last a week-long assault. Tending the dual fires that kept the space livable, the main one roaring for meals of beans simmered with bits of salted fish, providing bursts of heat to thaw frozen fingers, while the steady glow from the second pit warded off the encroaching chill without wasting precious logs, and she melted snow in a pot for drinking water, careful not to let it boil away. All while the structure groaned but held firm, its curved metal roof shedding snow instead of buckling, and the chimneys staying clear thanks to their protruding designs that poked above the accumulation. Alone in that dim, firelit cocoon, with no windows to the outside world, time blurred into a rhythm of stoking flames, eating sparse portions to stretch supplies, and listening to the storms howl, her mind wandering to memories of warmer Minnesota winters and worries about her husband Ness's fate out there somewhere. But she pushed down the fear by focusing on small tasks like mending gloves or sharpening her knife, reminding herself that panic was the real killer in isolation, and through it all, the shelter proved its worth, maintaining an interior temperature around 40 degrees above zero when the fires were balanced just right, a miracle in such extremes where unprotected humans could succumb to hypothermia in hours. When the winds finally died down after 7 endless days, she emerged by digging out the entrance flap. Stepping into a transformed world of pristine white dunes under a clear blue sky, her breath fogging in the still frigid air, but alive and stronger for it, having proven to herself that resourcefulness could conquer even Alaska's worst. And just as she began clearing paths to the woodpile, she heard the faint crunch of snowshoes in the distance. Her husband, delayed by the same storm but safe, approaching with wide eyes at the sight of her creation, a sturdy little fortress born from scrap that had saved her life. He helped reinforce it further, and they spent the rest of the winter there, cozy and productive, hunting game and planning their future log cabin for spring. With the Quonset hut becoming a storage shed and workshop that stood for over 30 years before Russ claimed it, a quiet testament to Margaret's ingenuity that locals still talked about long after. Margaret lived a full life in Alaska, raising a family and becoming a pillar in her community, always downplaying her feat with a humble shrug, saying she just did what needed doing. But her story reminds us that survival isn't about being fearless, it's about adapting, using what's at hand, and keeping that inner fire burning, no matter how dark it gets outside. A lesson from history that hits home in our own uncertain times. So, if this tale of grit and cleverness got you thinking about your own resilience, hit that like button if you'd build a shelter like Margaret's. Subscribe for more real history stories that inspire and surprise, and drop a comment below. What's the toughest challenge you've overcome alone? Let's keep the conversation going. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next one.